Welcome to Glacial Inferno Gaming. My name is Jay. I want to give a quick update. I've been working the last few days on trying to get together all of my thoughts from everything I've tested with the Ailment build and going towards a pure Ailment setup. And then this morning, right as I was trying to wrap all that up, we got patch 1.0.5.0, which for us, mainly all that really brings is the crit ailment damage. So I've been going back through a lot of testing to try to figure out all the different multipliers of the different nodes that we've been taking for damage, and then try to put together what I think is a relative feasible or theoretical max damage. So first off, with the patch notes, what we got that affect the build in the current state that it was in is a lot of damage, crit damage modifiers, which will negate pretty much anything we did with crit bleeding edge to begin with. And then on top of that, we've got despotic perseverance dropped from a 20% damage boost per ailment stack to 2%. Which is a 10 times damage loss. So our previous crits of bleeding edge that were doing nearly 1 million damage would now maybe do 100,000 at best, which would still be a big enough nerf. But then they have added a cooldown to unstoppable momentum. So with this, we can get the cooldown down to about 4 seconds, but the damage just isn't doing very much. And all of that combined with the fact that we have changed the modifier for, let me find it here, captured velocity, I believe, no sorry, which time cannot heal, which has also cut into the amount of damage that we were dealing to bosses. So all that out of the way, pretty much bleeding edge is no longer viable as a rage dump spell, unless you use it without the cooldown rune modifier or whatever. So we have to find something else, which we were already kind of testing with just in case to see how badly this got nerfed. So with that, the things that do help us, we have fixed an issue with computation of the Primordial Insights passive node. And that is, of course, our infamous crit ailment. So now we do get crits when we deal ailment damage, and they continue to tick at the crit rate. Now I am seeing some people saying that once they crit one, it applies the crit to all of their ailment stacks. I have not tested that out fully enough to be able to tell. I can tell at low level, if you crit, all ailments that were applied with that crit do apply a crit damage modifier. I also have tested and found that reapplying an ailment just extends the duration of all existing ailments on that enemy. So if we had 30 stacks of burn, and at the end of the 3 seconds that it lasts, we hit them with another burn, that would then refresh all 30 stacks instead of having to rebuild those stacks. So that is beneficial. One thing I have also learned through rigorous testing is the node Grievous Afflictions. What I have found is I am not applying 2 different ailments with the exact same hit. So I was testing this out earlier, and I'll try to get some gameplay of that up maybe at the end, but I would either freeze or I would burn. There was not one time in all that testing, even with a 50% ailment chance, where I both froze and burned at the same time. So that is something to take into consideration. Now, most of our build is designed around a lot of quick hitting skills, so we're applying a lot of ailments all at once. So ultimately, I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal. One of the other things that I came across through testing, which has been a question that's been posed to me for about a week now. The plus ailment stacks from belts, rings, and amulets. So these do apply before Power of the First Men doubles them. So I was testing this out with a burn on Consuming Ember with just one ailment, and one stack was dealing about 280 damage, but every time I actually applied it, I was doing around 4,000 damage. So I was getting the full 14 stacks of burn on that one proc. So that's good to know. That does let us know that we could have a theoretical maximum of 22 stacks of any ailment applied on a single proc. So definitely something to keep in mind there. Now, as far as other testing, Immortal Offering, I had previously recommended to stay away from it because it messes up our ailments, and it does still do that. However, I have found that this is our single biggest source of damage. So each of those stacks, it says grants 5% damage as corresponding damage type for each ailment stack on that enemy, up to 5 stacks per damage type. So what this actually does is it's a more multiplier similar to Path of Exile style, where if we get 5 stacks of a burn, then we get a 25% damage multiplier. If we have all 7 stacks, which is poison, bleed, burn, shock, curse, weakness, and stasis, which we run in our build, we can get a 175% damage multiplier to our ailment damage, which is just massive. I have found in testing as well that the crit damage that we deal with our ailment crit is a double damage multiplier. So whatever the damage was, it now deals twice as much. So that's a clean 100% multiplier. One thing we've also found through testing is all of the percent ailment damage on the tree, as well as all of the percent flat damage from either attributes or from gear. Each 1% gives us 0.32 damage per tick per stack per ailment. So what I've been working on is putting together a compilation of all of this testing. So what I have found, let me actually move a piece here. There we go. All right, so what I have found through testing is we take the attributes from our the damage from our attributes, the damage from our gears, and just the flat damage from tree, and we add all of those together, as well as the damage from ailment damage from the tree, which currently we're getting 190%, and then all of that is multiplied by the 0.32 to base stack damage. So for instance, right now, if I come into my damage here and I remove all the more multipliers that I get in combat, I'm at 289.65 for one stack. And if we come over to our sheet here, we're showing 290 to 8690 on burn, which corresponds exactly with what we have here. I do have on my gear percent bleed ailment damage, which is why the bleed is a little bit higher, and some increased material damage, which is why the poison is a little higher. But the burn and shock line up exactly as we have here. So with that, the things that I've found that affect the most. Like I said, Immortal Offering, when we have full stack, is 175% multiplier. Critting is 100% multiplier. Mark of Impurity with no rune gives us a 19.7% multiplier, which is a huge damage boost. However, what I have found is the curse stacks are not very effective. In testing, I was getting 0.018% more damage per curse stack. So I calculated this out with Mark of Impurity. With the Cursed Rune, we instantly apply 30 stacks because we apply 10 plus 6 and then we double. So we're already maxed at 30 as soon as we put it on there. But that's not really doing anything for us. Mark of Impurity does have 2 increased damage modifiers that make it even more beneficial. So the curse, we said, adds very little. Each of Big Game Hunting and Weight of Culpability add about 5% more damage for a 10% increase when you put them together. And then the increased ailment damage on marked enemies, I actually found only gives 1.3% more damage, which is very low. And then the increased crit ailment damage, or the increased crit damage, which will apply on any that we crit, and it does apply to the ailment ticks, gives us a 2.67% increased damage, which is a little lackluster. But on to the Gate of Fates. Some of the modifiers that I've tested. I have tested the Abernazar's Accord from the Oracle of Trinity's Ancient Fervor tree. It says you have 20% more damage when the Accord is active. I have found through testing that is actually a 2% damage modifier. Through other testing, we have been playing with Persistence Hunting, a 25% damage to enemies with impaired movement. Through my testing today, I have found that to be 2.5%. With Meditative Focus, saying 25% damage, as well as Death from Afar, another 10% damage. In my testing, I have found that those are applying at 2.5 and 1% damage. So again, not very strong. One of the biggest boosts we can get to our technical damage is Dawn's Pious Striker and Sudden Death from Eos. And at that point, our Solar Fall, dealing sacred damage, will immediately kill off enemies at 15% of their max health. So we can effectively call that a 15% more multiplier because we'll kill the enemy 15% faster. So right now, I'm not using Abernazar's Accord on my build here. So we'll actually just make that a 0. I have a theoretical max DPS just from the ailment ticks at 400,000 DPS, which sounds actually really viable for most content. Now, of course, when you get into the later stages and bosses have 50, 80, 150 million health, all of a sudden that doesn't look so good. And it gets worse. On most bosses, because we don't have any adds to kill, we don't have Immortal Offering. And once we take away Immortal Offering, we wind up at 145,000 DPS. Now, I was trying to fight a boss earlier that had, I think he had 80 million actually, before it crashed on me. And so if we take 80 million DPS, we wind up with 550 seconds. Assuming I filled that in right. Yep. And then we take that out. That means that 80 million life boss turns into a 9-minute fight of just that boss. This gets worse when you figure in the late stage ascended bosses, where you're looking at 150 million life, or a 17-minute fight just for that boss. Now, if we had Immortal Offering, of course, that would be better. That'd take it to about a 6-minute fight. Now, some of these ailments, some of these modifiers may not be applying the way that they're supposed to. So, if we say that some of these are not what they're supposed to be, so say we say Persistence Hunting actually gives us 25%. If Meditative Focus actually gave us 25%. If Death from Afar actually gave us 10%. If Curse actually gave us the curse effectiveness that it shows on the damage sheet at 34%. Now, we would at least be talking almost 800,000 DPS, or double the damage we were at, taking that same 150 million damage boss down to a 3-minute fight. But even then, if we take out Immortal Offering, it still becomes about a 9-minute fight, so it's a little more feasible there. So that would be ideal if things matched what they say they do. Now, as far as theoretical maximum, if we have our damage from our gear, this is what I have on right now. Technically, you can roll 28% increased damage, which would give you the most damage across the board. So 35% would give you more material damage, but 28% will give you increased material and elemental damage for more damage across the board. So if we do 28% damage, and it can roll on all armors. So we have our shoulder, helmet, shoulders, our glove, chest, glove, pants, and boots. So that gives us 8 possible locations. You can't craft percent damage, but if you theoretically got 8 by 28% damage, and then you have the tree at 16%, the 190% increased ailment damage from tree. There are a few places where you can get a little bit of ailment damage from your gear, one of which might be the chest, which would be a little more viable because then you get 100% and take away one of the 28% here. So if you ran Agony here, then that would give you better damage than just any other body shield. So if we get all that, and then we figure, let me switch over to an offline character here that I've been testing at 90 to try to figure out what our damage multiplier would be just from attributes at 90 as we discuss the theoretical maximum of what we can do with the game right now. And we dump all of this into one stat, doesn't really matter. That'll give us the highest. So 445 there, plus we figure there was another 6 to... Hang on. Because I was already at 520. Theoretically, if the highest one gives us 0.5 per, we can do it this way. Because I'm 22 levels from, or 12 levels from max, which is 120 stat points. So we call it another 60%. So we take that to 580. So now with the way the modifiers count right now, I believe, with the exception of maybe a few uniques that would also make our stacking a little more difficult. You say we put on Shadow Call, which I believe gives like 20% ailment damage. So we can take that to 120. I think we can achieve a theoretical max damage around 500,000 before gems. And as far as gems, we have the plus 10% damage straight from the Genesis Stones, which we could put 3 in a weapon, which would give us 30% damage there. We could put an increased ailment damage in there as well, but then we'd have to spread it out across. What we can do though is the support 2, the percent fire damage, percent rend damage, percent toxic damage, and percent lightning damage. So with these 4, if we took those 4 and put them in support 2s, we could roll 3 support 2s on our catalyst and 4 support 2s across our accessories. Then we would wind up with an estimate with a probable 40% increase. We'll call it 35% increase across all ailments to be fair. 30% from the Genesis Stones, so 65%. And then we can roll 100% bleed ailment, 100% shock ailment, 100% burn ailment, 100% poison ailment. But we can only roll 2 of them from what I've tested. Can't completely confirm this, but from what I've seen, I can't get multiple ailment damage increases on a single item. So if we put the 100% on each of them, consider that at a 50% effectiveness. So then we're at 115% extra from the gear, taking that to 235. A little bit of rough numbers there. Doesn't really impact the DPS very much. All of that gives us about a 10% increase. Not huge by any stretch. Which puts us in the realm of about 551,000 DPS. Which, like I said, with 150 million life boss, would mean it's about a 5-minute fight. Which isn't the worst thing in the world. I think if we can get to the theoretical maximums, that'd be great. The biggest challenge with the boss then is you lose the immortal offering, taking it to a 12.5-minute fight, which is not very viable, especially not for late game trying to run Untainteds where you're on a timer. I think in its current state, with the modifiers that I've tested and the modifiers that I've found and calculated, the build doesn't do what it should do. If we go back and we take these all back to the theoretical maximums that they would be if they actually rolled the way that they're supposed to, that would actually put us at a 1.3 million DPS ailment build, which would take that final boss to a 2-minute fight. If we had full stacks, if not, it'd still only be a 5-minute fight. And I do think that that is viable. I think that's where we would be comfortably in a min-max setup. But for the moment, that's not what we're at. And between that and constantly right now, I'm crashing every time I run a zone. I can't even run it on my laptop anymore after the latest update. It just doesn't load. It's becoming really difficult to test out all of these numbers and really try to grind this out, but I'm trying to get content together for you guys to give some heads up and give some explanation of what's been going on, and that way we can keep trying to make this better together and Ideally, I do think this will be viable, but like I said, I think these nodes just aren't working the way they're supposed to. I don't think Curse is working the way that it's supposed to. I'd like to see these be a little bit more effective. Maybe not that one, but these two definitely just seem very insignificant. But more than likely, we'll find out that Immortal Offering is doing too much damage, and that'll come down. Which, again, I wouldn't totally hate as long as these came up. But as it stands right now, they just aren't. And that's a huge difference in our damage. Especially this one. That's not showing properly. There we go. So with that, I think that's the current state of ailments. I'm going to continue to keep trying to push this. I would love to hear if there's any other builds or any other ideas you guys like to see me try to work on. I have been thinking about going minion as an opportunity, also pure caster. There's a lot of different things we can kind of play around with, because I do want to see if we can do very specialized builds. I've seen a lot that are starting to do, you know, a little bit of everything. It's minion, ailment, cast, and maybe that's what the game wants to force us to do. But I'd like to try to keep this as ailment focused as I possibly can on this build, and kind of try to build some specialized builds with it. So with that, I'm going to put some gameplay footage at the end, a little bit of my testing, maybe some crash frustration. We'll see what we put together. But thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to continuing to make this stuff work as long as things quit crashing. Thank you. So let's see how this does. Let's stay away from him for a second. Really? Definitely doable. It's not setting any speed records. Yeah, that is 52 million. Really? Hits me out of nowhere and crashes me.